This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Best of Today. I'm Justin Webb. One of the great goals in our tech future is driverless cars, full automation so that we can read a paper or watch TV while being zoomed from place to place. It is a long way off, if it happens at all, but are we thinking enough about whether it should happen at all, and indeed whether all the things that big tech tells us will make life easier and safer are actually destroying something very central to who we are as people? The American philosopher Matthew Crawford wrote a book called Why We Drive. I've been talking to him about cars, freedom, and what it means to be human.
Well, I think you can regard the push for driverless cars and automation generally maybe as part of this wider kind of development in which the demands of skill and competence give way to a promise of safety and convenience. And then, of course, our skills atrophy from lack of use. So, we're sort of nudged ever further into a kind of passivity and dependence on various fronts. And I have to think that that's politically significant.
Politically significant how?
Well, Tocqueville, when he traveled around America, was very impressed with how people work things out for themselves. And it's in everyday practical activities that demand cooperation that he thought the sort of habits of self-government are cultivated. There's a kind of skill in being a democratic citizen, and it requires working things out without everything being supervised by some kind of tutelary entity, whether that's a cartel of tech firms or, a central government.
But didn't people say that about, the washing machine or the dishwasher or any other things that have been automated and actually we kind of got used to, and they haven't significantly reduced our freedom? Indeed, actually, you could say the opposite. They've increased our freedom, or the freedom of people who used to do those jobs.
Yeah, I'd like to make a distinction between freedom and agency. So, if you're not doing this and not doing that, you're freed up to do something else. But I think it's also, as kind of beings with bodies, with hands that are intimately connected to our brains, to be entirely disburdened of doing anything for yourself leads into this condition which the whole world starts to look like one big assisted living facility. And it's not a very attractive picture, I think.
I suppose also thinking about driving, you have to use your judgment, don't you? And on a day in your life when you might not use your judgment in a kind of life and death way, do I go through this junction or don't I, and all those sorts of things. And you have to interact actually as well, driving with other people and kind of guess what their judgment is. And none of that's quite the case with the dishwasher.
Yeah, driving is an inherently social activity. That road is an interesting hybrid space, you might say, because we're both very alone in our cars and sharing this space together. So I think thinking about driving can serve as a nice kind of microcosm of thinking more broadly about the problem of social solidarity in a highly individualistic society.
Can we stop it? Do we have agency enough to be able to say, both with automatic driving, with the kind of things that we face in driving, the kind of technological innovations that there are, but also more widely as well, do we still have agency? Do we still have the ability to say, you know what, no? Well,
the whole sort of push for driverless cars has not been a response to consumer demand. Pew has done a number of polls of people's attitudes about driverless cars, and people are still suspicious of them, skeptical about the benefits, and also somewhat attached to driving their own cars. So clearly, this is a kind of top-down project of social engineering, you might say, one that could be potentially enormously profitable. But of course, those are profits that will be really a transfer of wealth from, one place to another. You can think of it as a move by big tech to essentially capture some of the profits of Detroit, from the Bay Area to the Bay Area from Detroit. So And of course, it requires, massive expenditures by you and me to buy one of these cars if this vision ever were to be brought to fruition. And one of the really solid lessons of the last several years of research in autonomous vehicles is that for human beings to share the road with robot cars is a very dim prospect. That is kind of an all or nothing proposition, because for robots and human drivers to share the road, these are two very different kinds of intelligence. And that's where the real engineering problem has blossomed into something much more complex than was anticipated even 2 years ago.
Of course, that then goes to your safety question and the fans of automated driving saying, well, pointing out, which is true, isn't it, that actually the machines will make fewer errors and cause fewer catastrophes than humans currently do.
Well, that's certainly the big selling point, or one of them. And there have been some forensic statisticians who have looked into some of the claims made by Tesla in particular about the safety enhancements that they claimed for their autopilot feature. And once you dig into the data, the claim really crumbled. So the safety claims are now, there's been some good journalism on this. At first, there was a lot of very credulous journalism. The technology is not mature. Yet it's being tested on public roads. So things have gotten more complicated on that front, certainly.
Are we too in love with tech? And when I say in love, I mean in the kind of almost deepest sense. Are you talking about us replacing in our lives religion or whatever it was that we used to worship with something else, and that something being dangerous to us? Is that the wider picture here?
I think it's a good question. I mean, obviously, there is some appeal in being relieved of involvement in everyday activities that used to be part of daily life. There's a kind of ideology of freedomism that we sort of, without thinking, we adopt, and the suggestion seems to be that being relieved of taking care of our own physical environment is a state of higher freedom. But again, there's this kind of atrophy of our basic human capacities as embodied beings who do things for ourselves and for one another. And I think people are starting to sort of chafe against this felt imperative to, make everything ever more uninvolving and abstract. And people are seeking out more analog kind of relationship to the world.
Has that been affected, that debate, even if it's a debate in people's minds, has it been affected, do you think, by COVID, by the pandemic, and by all the things that were done and not done during it?
I think one thing that COVID did is it kind of revealed to us that this ethic of safetyism can become a kind of extreme and almost totalitarian mindset, because during COVID, we fixated on a few very narrow metrics, case counts and hospitalization rates and stuff like that. And sort of outside that tunnel vision, there was a sort of blindness about the wider field of harms being done by, the lockdowns and all the measures we took to control the virus. So safetyism can, I think, distort one's vision in that way. And I think that's something people have woken up to and are maybe now inclined to be a little more careful, a little more skeptical when there's some entity that's making a claim to keep us safe, which really is kind of the grounds on which, a power grab is often made.
Just to finish on this thought of safety, we are torn, aren't we? Because we kind of naturally think we would like to be safer. We'd like everyone to be safer. But you are telling us that in that desire, we are doing something dangerous to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if you question any kind of safety claim, you're labeled pro-death, which is not a good career move. So there's a kind of moral intimidation that can be accomplished simply by trotting out safety. And, even on its own terms, often these safety claims don't quite pan out. So I think we all have to be a little more skeptical about these things.
Matthew Crawford, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Justin.